Okay, hello and welcome to this exclusive Eyefortravel webinar on the key mistakes made in brand storytelling and how to get it right. I am very excited to have some fantastic speakers with me today to discuss the secrets to successful brand storytelling and how to gain competitive edge. So before I go ahead and introduce them, I just wanted to let you know that if you do have any questions throughout the duration of the webinar, then make sure you enter them in the chat box below. Also, if you have any problems hearing us, just let us know and we'll do our best to fix that as well. So while we're waiting for a few more people to get logged in here, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Emily Assender and I'm one of the conference directors at Eyefortravel, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. This webinar is actually in association with the senior level travel industry event Online Marketing Strategies for Travel, the Americas and Caribbean, which is being held June 2nd and 3rd at the Ritz-Carlton in Miami. It's a fantastic event and a fantastic location, so if you'd like to learn more about online marketing strategies for travel, then do reach out to me at emily@eyefortravel.com and we'll get you registered to join the event this June. Note, the early bird prices for the event do expire next Friday, April 10th, so do reach out to me before then if you think you'd like to attend. Now, I am very excited to welcome our three expert speakers today. We have Frederick Gonzalo, owner of Gonzo Marketing. We have Brett Steiger, Senior Director of Marketing, Brand Research, Social and Content at Travelocity, and John Wolf, Vice President, Global Brand Public Relations at Marriott International. Thank you all very much for being here today. We're very excited to have you with us at this webinar. Frederick is going to start us off with a presentation, and then we'll ask John and Brett to join us for the panel discussion after the presentation has concluded. So just to give you a little bit more information about Frederick, he has over 20 years of experience in the travel and tourism space. He is an experienced travel and hospitality marketing speaker and consultant, and he was ranked most influential blogger for e-tourism and travel in the province of Quebec, Canada, and among the most influential bloggers for marketing and social media in Canada in both 2013 and 2014, and hopefully 2015 as well. So note, if you do have any questions for Frederick during the presentation, then feel free to enter these in the dialog box. And finally, yes, we are recording this, so if you'd like to go back and review the content in this webinar, then that's okay. We'll be sending you the recording of this webinar shortly after it has concluded. So we're just going to kick off today just to get a little bit of an idea about what our listeners are currently experiencing. We just want to really gauge what your challenges are and how you currently communicate with your audience at the moment. So we're just going to run two polls. When the poll comes up, obviously the questions will come, and if you could submit your answer of what really applies to you, then that would be great. So for the first poll, just give it a second and it'll come up shortly. Great, I'll just give you a few more moments to answer the question, which is, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to creating content? And I'll close the poll. I'll give you another, and that's it. Okay. So in terms of what we're seeing there, the biggest challenge that our listeners today are finding is actually time in terms of creating content. And so the question was, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to creating content? 31% of you, it's time. I certainly know that that's definitely what applies to us as well in our business. 26% of you say capable resources, 23% demonstrating ROI, 13% money, of course, and 7% of you say there are other reasons. So that's very interesting. And now let's go to the second poll. It should be up soon. So what is the most effective content according to your target audience? Great, so just give you a few more seconds and we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's just see what kind of results we had there. So the question we put to our audience obviously is, what is the most effective content according to your target audience? Now, the majority of you, 62%, say here photos, followed by 20% videos. Video is certainly a very important content type, which seems to be coming up over and over again in our research here at Eyefortravel. And then 11% after is a tweet or short status posts, and 7% long-form text. So that's really interesting. Thanks ever so much for letting us know exactly where you currently stand in terms of content creation. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Frederick, who will give you his presentation on the key mistakes made in brand storytelling and how to get it right. Frederick?
Yes, thank you, Emily. Now, can you see my screen all right?
Give us 1 second.
I'll put this up.
Great.
You should be able
we can see us. That's right. Yeah, great. We can see you now. Thanks, Frederick.
Excellent. So thanks for the intro. Very interesting results from that poll. I think I'll get back to that. But the first poll, and it said time was the biggest issue. It's interesting because that correlates with a survey done last year at DMAI with over 100 different destinations in North America and Europe, and time was the biggest issue. So surprisingly, ROI and money comes second or third, but we all have issue with time, it seems. Anyway, let's get back to the agenda here. We'll talk about what storytelling is and isn't. I will present briefly what I consider to be the 5 success factors for travel brands, and I'll finish it off with a little case study to sort of illustrate what we're discussing. Now, all this information, I actually wrote a blog post this week called The 5 Success Factors of Travel Brands. You can see it on my site, frederickgonzalo.com, so people can go and check it out. Some examples I will be referring to today, others that are there you might want to look upon. So first and foremost, what do we mean by storytelling? It's a big nuance here with what some people consider to be traditional advertising, and I think that's the biggest difference there, is that it's on the premise of emotion. It's telling a story, and we're dealing with, it's not facts per se, and I think that's the biggest difference that we need to bear into consideration. When you're pushing out an ad and you're saying, my room is at $129, or we're the best because we do this, or we have a great event because we're going to have this rock band playing, that's great, that's advertising, it's more traditional content, but it's not storytelling. Storytelling truly is, when we're dealing with some of the basic human responses or empathy, sympathy, outrage, laughter, it deals with emotions, and it's essentially going beyond just simply talking about facts, for example. So I think it's important, and I like the analogy here where you see the fire, and I think this is a great symbol here where you see what does it take to have a great evening, right? When you're by the campfire with friends, well, first of all, you need friends. You need to have someone bring a guitar. You need someone going to tell jokes. Others are going to tell horror stories. And so it's really about the mix of what's there. It's going to make for a great evening. Now, the second level of this analogy is when you have such an evening like that, around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, then it might finish, and then it's very difficult to replicate that the following day or the following week. So you want to make sure you keep the fire going, and thus for travel brands, I think it's about, and especially those who have to deal with seasonality, you want to make sure that you stoke that fire and that you have consistent content out there using that mix so that the story of the brand keeps being told and that people remember you, not just when you push out an ad, because at the end of the day, you also need to do some of that. We'll get back to that. So just to define storytelling. Now, I've alluded to emotions, not just facts. I think this is the very first point. I'll get to this in a minute. But we'll also see the other 4 success factors I consider, which is soliciting travelers and locals, the importance of communicating offline and not just dealing with online. We'll look at multi-channel, and then importance to have great content mix. So let's go with this. Emotions, not just facts. I'll show you briefly a little video here. Hopefully everything will run, and then I'll get back to you in a second.
I see a little silhouette of the man. Scaramouche, Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Oh, thunderbolt and lightning. Very, very frightening me. Galileo. Galileo? Galileo? Figaro. I'm just a poor boy. Nobody loves me. He's just a poor boy from a poor family.
Spare him his life for this monstrosity.
Easy come, easy go. Will you let me go? Miss Miller. No, we will not let you go. Let me go. We will not let you go. We will not let you go.
Let me go!
No, 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 no.
Mamma mia, mamma mia, mamma mia, let me go.
Now, of course, you'll laugh when you see this ad, and I like the tagline at the end where it basically says just the right amount of wrong. And you could use this kind of tagline, and you can use the content afterwards, whether it's on your Facebook posts or tweets, Instagram, overall campaigns. Now, this is a more traditional type of ad you could run, but no one's going to run a 1-minute ad on TV. But we're seeing more and more hotels and destinations use this kind of content to tell the story in a different way, to sort of steer away from just the classical facts about your property and the amenities that you have in your room. Fairmont Hotels did similar initiative a couple of years ago. I think it's still ongoing, where you have a website and you share your experiences. I know Marriott as well has been doing this for a couple of months now, where they actually offer GoPro cameras to their in their hotel properties in the Caribbean and Latin America, I believe. And I think John will attest to that later on. Why would they give away GoPro? No, they don't give them away. They lend them for the day, but people can basically use those cameras, tell the story of the destination, what's going on in the hotel. So it's ways that you can tell the story, and it's going obviously much further than just dealing with stating the facts. So this is a great example here. And as I said, and I was saying just now, soliciting locals and travelers. So when you give cameras to the people, you give free Wi-Fi, you're making sure that the people out there can tell the story for the brand or the destination or the attraction. I love the example of how the folks that Visit Sweden, they were one of the first ones to do that. They gave away basically they really gave away the handle of @Sweden ever since 2010. Every week there's a different Swede living either in Sweden or across as expat, telling the story of what it's like, everyday life, and it showcases what it's like to be Swedish and things you do when if you were in Sweden, for example. So this is what we seek when we talk about authenticity. Bear in mind, latest surveys say to us that 92% of us actually believe peer reviews and local sites such as TripAdvisor, Yelp, while only 14 of us believe advertising, traditional advertising. So when we're seeing peer reviews or comments like this made by locals, we believe it much more. Even the folks at Visit Philadelphia did this in 2013, 2014, where they gave the control of their Instagram handle to locals, that they would take photography. Obviously, they were avid Instagrammers, so they're going to go in their neighborhoods that they know well. They know much better than you and I or any agency, and they'll show you off the beaten path things to see and do. So that's very powerful, and it goes in line with storytelling, telling the story of the brand, of the destination, or the hotel. Another aspect to bear into consideration that's important is communicating offline. It's great that you have this campaign running on Twitter or Instagram, but if the travelers don't know about it, it's very hard to know what the hashtag is. So I'll get to the case study later on with Tourism Montreal, but you see an example here with the folks at Visit Dallas. They have a hashtag running which is called Dallas Big. You know how everything is big in Texas and everything is big in Dallas. So they basically put the B and the G in various famous spots across the city, and basically they tell people, well, you just put yourself in that picture. You be the eye, right, to make it big. But they also help you. They take you by the hand and they tell you, look, the hashtag is written there on the G. It's written on the floor. So how do you help people to make sure they know about the existence of that hashtag so that they, again, the story will be told. On my article this week, you'll see the example from Visit Denmark. I invite you to go check out the little 2-minute video. That's also very well done on how they try to get people who visit Denmark to tell the story of that destination. Another aspect to bear into consideration is multi-channel. There's various channels out there, and not every single one of them will have the same efficiency, whether it's display, click banners, social, generic paid search, referral traffic, email marketing, and so on. Different channel will have different efficiency further down if you go in the decision-making process. So you want to take that into consideration. If you click the link to the Think with Google report, you'll see how you can get to that. You can access that report. It changes dynamically. You can change per industry, if it's a small, medium, or big company. But the message here is to, it's not necessarily going to be, storytelling might not be the best thing if you're trying to convert and the person is near the spot where you need to make this decision between a room at a certain location, but storytelling will be more powerful higher up upstream when you're talking about which destination to go to, or when you want to make people dream of a certain destination or attraction or event or hotel, and that's where storytelling plays a bigger role. So it's important also to understand what role it plays in your equation in terms of marketing. And finally, very interesting, when we did that second poll, not surprisingly, photos came out very strong, right? 62% of you who voted said photos, and videos came in second place. Now, surprisingly, we're seeing, and this was a study made by Social Bakers earlier this year, actually last month, we're seeing that video now is becoming the big thing, and no surprise, since Facebook introduced autoplay last summer of 2014, there's now more videos being played on Facebook than on YouTube. There's actually more now being uploaded since last month than on YouTube. So video is now becoming big in terms of organic reach, and it's the same as well in terms of engagement, but it all depends. Now, you might be surprised by this graph when you're seeing photo at the bottom. There's obviously a lot of photos being shared as a thumbnail with the status when you post on Facebook, but you're seeing Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, all of those visual platforms are becoming huge, and travel brands need to embrace them and understand at the end of the day it's all about mixing the content. It's not just one or the other. It's really making sure that you have a good content approach overall. So I'll finish it off with a little case study that sort of encompasses all of those elements as far as I'm concerned, and it's how the folks at Tourism Montreal have been putting this into place. Now, you see the quote here from the VP Marketing where they really look at it more in terms of niche and motivations. It's not just segmenting travelers as we used to do, 20 years ago, but even 5 years ago. Tourism Montreal, since 2009, almost 6 years ago now, really took the digital shift, and they had a destination blog, which they still do, which is a lot of quality content. At the time, they had 5 or 6 bloggers and travel writers that they would use to have some great content there and that they pay. Even last year, they introduced a new blog for meetings and conventions. They're among the few destinations doing that as far as we know right now. Of course, they do the typical photo videos being shared on all the important platforms. They also introduced last year a web series catering to the gay lesbian market. So again, this is a novelty, and we're seeing, I believe, again, the folks from Marriott will tell us about, I think they're also doing something similar, and I'm seeing more and more hotels using short film videos, for example, to tell the story of the brand in a different way. What you're seeing on the right is when I was telling you about communicating offline, when they launch their MTL moment, the hashtag MTL moments, which is great, by the way, because it's bilingual. It actually works well in different languages. And they've put in different spots across the city these frames. So basically they're telling people, put yourself in that picture. And so, and the hashtag is there, so it's easy to use on Instagram, on Pinterest, on Twitter, wherever you use, obviously, hashtags. Now, and you're seeing, last I checked was last week, there was over 125,000 pictures that were tagged with, or actually media that were tagged with that hashtag on Instagram alone. So it's huge, and that's all content that you can reuse afterwards on your newsletters, on your Facebook, on your blog, on your website, as we're seeing in LA, for example, and various destinations. So what are some of the key performance indicators that we saw from that when they launched that? It was early summer 2013. After 6 months, they'd already seen an increase, a direct increase with this campaign in terms of Facebook followers, same with their Twitter accounts, both in English and in French. They were able to isolate as well a 15% increase or jump in their website traffic after those 6 months alone. So, of course, this campaign has been ongoing, and it contributed to an increase in their website traffic as well in 2014. So there is a direct impact, because whether you're a hotel, a destination, a restaurant, no matter what part of the travel industry you're in, if you have increased traffic to your website, you can do that by paying with AdWords or other traditional campaigns, or you can do it through storytelling and content marketing, and that's exactly what this example is about. And you're seeing it get actually, after that, of course, it becomes a challenge. How do you convert people once they're on your website? But that's a whole different story. So those are some of the elements I wanted to bring into the equation today. I know we'll have Brett and John will give us some great insights as well, and we'll be opening up for the panel. So on this, I'll just give it up to Emily, and I'll be up for questions if there's some as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Frederick. That was very interesting indeed. Certainly some extremely insightful points you pointed out there. Obviously, I find it really interesting how social seems to be playing an increasingly more significant part. When you said 92% of people believe that peer reviews over 14% who believe advertising. That kind of thing I find very, very interesting. That's certainly something which is the way forward where it's going. So I'd now like to invite John and Brett to the panel discussion. But before I invite them to speak, I'd just like to give you a little more information on our next two speakers. First of all, John Wolfe, as Vice President of Global Public Relations. John is responsible for leading public relations for Marriott International's 8 Marriott-endorsed brands and Marriott Rewards globally. He's also in charge of primary oversight of all public relation activities for the company's flagship Marriott Hotels brand, which was awarded a Gold Adrian by the Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association International. So welcome, John.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Great to have you. And secondly, I'd like to welcome Brett Steiger. Brett was named 40 under 40 of brand marketers by Brand Innovators. He is passionate about generating value for consumers and companies through the creation, integration, and execution of brand marketing. Brett is a skilled professional in brand marketing, omni-channel marketing strategy, market research, social media and content marketing, and he's an integral member of the Expedia brand, Travelocity. So welcome you, Brett, as well.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here as well.
No, it's great to have you too. And just a really quick note to our listeners as well. A couple of you have been posting comments on the comment box, which is fantastic. So if you do have questions, then let us know, and we'll look to address them throughout this conversation next. So yeah, back to Frederick. That was a really, really interesting presentation you gave us there. I wonder, I mean, I don't know, to offer the floor to John first of all. What do you think, would you say, are the 3 most important factors in storytelling for a travel brand?
Well, I think, I'd like to start sort of with our approach to storytelling, or what we call, really content creation, and the sort of the lens that we put it through and how we approach it. And we call it our 3C strategy. And that's what we've initiated. We began late last year when we created the Marriott Content Studio. And really what it involves is the idea of creating engaging content that will build communities of people passionate about travel. And then obviously we're a hotel company, and that will ultimately drive the last C, which is commerce. In other words, to bring to heads and beds, as they say. And so from our approach or our perspective, it's critical that whatever we do in the content arena, that it needs to truly add value. In other words, if we're adding value to the lives of the consumers that we are interested in and that we're targeting, and I think that most of us know we talk about the millennials all the time, that clearly that's a very enticing audience for us, is that if we add value to their lives by entertaining them, by giving them informative content, that they will in turn give us value back. So for us in terms of storytelling, it really ties into that strategy of what we call the 3 C's and really providing value that, you know, sort of evokes an emotion and a reaction in a way that is very, very positive and reflects obviously positively on our brand. And, you know, it's sort of interesting because I love Frederick's idea of the campfire, and we sort of describe or use a different analogy, which is essentially we approach content, and then again this idea of storytelling, is sort of like a first date. If all you do is talk about yourself on a first date, it's not likely to be a second date. You've got to be a lot more nuanced. So that's really kind of our approach to content creation, or what we're calling and describing as storytelling as well too.
Hey, John, it's Frederick here.
Hi.
Do you ever get those awkward silences on that first date?
Not yet. No, we have not.
Excellent. Hey, can you tell us a bit about that initiative?
Hi guys, I'm so sorry. I actually I muted myself there. I asked a question, and then Frederick came on with an awkward silence. I didn't really understand, and I realised. But no, I'll ask that question again. I'm so sorry. I was asking.
Yeah, so we didn't get the awkward silence till just now. That was the first one.
The experience. That's what happens if you stop talking about yourself on the first date. No, so this is a question for John, actually. I said, you mentioned that the millennials, which obviously seems to be a bit of a buzzword at the moment. I was wondering, do you think that storytelling seems to appeal to millennials more so than other potential consumers, such as baby boomers or the experiential traveler?
You know, I don't necessarily say it does or it doesn't. I think that what you're seeing when you look at the generations, obviously, is the way that millennials like to consume content is different than, say, their parents, if they're boomers or Xers, the way that they consume content. So, you know, our approach now is changing in terms of the mix. So, you know, there is always room for traditional advertising, but we realize that millennials, you know, they see traditional advertising can be sort of interruptive in their lives. And the change in terms of our mix enables us to produce content beyond just, obviously, advertising in a way that is compelling to them, a way that informs them, a way that entertains them, and as I was saying, adds value to their lives. So I don't think it's just strictly in terms of appealing to one, you know, segment per se or one demographic per se. I do believe that storytelling appeals to everybody. Everybody loves, you know, to Frederick's point about the, if I can go back to the campfire, everybody loves a good story. It's just maybe the way they want to consume that story may be a little bit different. So in the big picture storytelling, no, I don't think it's just aimed at a millennial audience or they're the only ones that want to consume it.
Okay, no, that's good. And so do you actually present the story in different ways depending on the consumer, or is it just generally at the moment in one kind of way?
Oh, no. I mean, we do it in many different ways. I mean, you know, again, this I think was referenced too in terms of the work we're doing in short films. We released our, you know, the Marriott Content Studio released its first short film called The Two Bellmen, and we're now approaching, you know, it's been live for about a month now, a little over a month, no, not even a month yet, and we're up to 5 million viewers. So, I mean, it really depends on the type of content. We also produce content with a website or a digital publication that we just launched called Eyefortravel, which is much more informative and really digs into a lot of popular destinations to provide content that you would not typically find in, you know, guidebooks and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's necessarily, that we provide content differently for different groups, but clearly, when you look at it from the perspective, especially demographic or how folks consume content, millennials are clearly becoming a force in the market in terms of, they will be, I think in a couple of years, the majority of frequent business travelers will be millennials. So clearly, as you look towards the future, that's sort of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Okay. And Brett, just to introduce you to the conversation, so have you got anything to add to that in terms of millennials, or how your strategy at Travelocity is particularly focusing on that, or is it something you're particularly focusing at all on?
No, definitely so. I mean, I agree with many of the things that John had said. I mean, it's tough to tailor every piece of thing to a specific consumer, but what we really try to do at Travelocity is understand who our target consumers are and really focus in on those groups. So, we're not necessarily ignoring a large population, because travel really, everyone enjoys traveling, whether it be something aspirational, whether it be to go connect with friends and family. But we really try to hit our target as best as possible. And, with the millennials, it is very much of a target market that you want to be adaptable for. So, the traditional days of bringing people along to your pieces of content and your website, those are long gone. And that's where social media, having relevant pieces of content, and also having things that they care about. One of the things that we hold very true here, and kind of was the reason behind our Go and Smell the Roses campaign that we're still running at Travelocity, is really making sure your brand and your story is authentic and ownable. Because the key, and ties very nicely with millennials, because millennials can really sniff out if there's some BS going on. If they don't think it's authentic, if they don't think it's real, they will quickly ignore you. And there's many stats out there showing that millennials are a little less brand loyal, because everyone's trying to be independent and show that they're really thinking through things in the right way. And so that's one of the biggest things I would say, is make sure your story and your brand is authentic and it's ownable by you and you only, because if not, you're going to probably lose the ears of a lot of your consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in terms of when you mention, you've got to make it authentic and ownable, what kind of tips would you give our listeners in terms of, if they were starting from scratch on their brand story strategy, how can you really make sure that it is authentic and ownable?
So the couple of things that I would really recommend are, one, get back to the roots of your company, your product, your service, whoever you're working for. Understand why did you come about? What needs are you servicing? So for Travelocity, just to give one quick example, I mean, even our name was something that we started digging into more. It's kind of the collision of travel and velocity, which sounds very simple when you think about it like that, but essentially that is saying travel, which is this inspirational item, with velocity of I have to get from point A to point B, and it's them coming together of how do we provide that efficiency to consumers while still inspiring them to get out and see the world. And that really helped us kind of get to our campaign and our tagline and positioning there. So definitely get back to your roots of who you are as a company, and really set a solid vision and mission for who you are and what you want to do. And some of those things will overlap with other companies, but there should be specific things that why you exist, why your company is successful, why you're growing. Those should be things you really try to tap into, because that's going to be a powerful item to use to talk to consumers, and they're going to really believe you when you find those few nuggets that really make sense.
Great. Okay. Well, we've got some really good questions actually, going back to what you're saying there. So, a question from Stefan Vincent. So he just wants to ask: so you develop storytelling content, but you don't actually customize it to your different audiences? Is that correct?
Is that myself or?
Sorry, Brett. So yeah, that's to you.
Okay. So we do create a bunch of content, and specifically with the roaming gnome, our 24-inch statue that somehow manages to get around the world but can't actually move. So we do create a lot of content. Do we customize it across the platforms we put it on? Yes, of course. I mean, we shape it to the audiences bit by bit. I think when I said we don't really customize every piece of it is at the end of the day, you have to stand for who you are. And so we have found the large amounts of consumers that we know we do well with and we can target. So we make customizations and tweaks here and there, but for the most part, we know who we're targeting, what they care about, what they want to see, and that's the type of content that we go and produce.
Okay, that's great. And Frederick, what's your opinion on this? To what extent, I mean, especially going from the earlier poll when time was one of the biggest constraints, how far do you think people should go in terms of customizing their storytelling to the different audiences?
Well, that's one of the big challenges, isn't it? And I think to some extent it's the same challenge that many travel brands are experiencing when they'll say, well, Frederick, you tell us about Instagram and Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook, but how can we manage all that? I mean, bigger brands where you have community managers and you have a marketing department won't be so much of a problem. Well, it could be, but I mean, there's in theory more resources. But for the small mom and pop inns and smaller outlets, it's an issue, So yes, time is an issue, and the resources that come along as well. But personalization, I think, when you saw that quote from Emmanuel Legault, the VP Marketing at Tourism Montreal, I think that's what it's all about. I think the future is in the niche. It truly is. You can't try to boil the ocean and try to have a generic content that will appeal to the masses. It just doesn't work anymore, if it ever did. So I think nowadays you sort of have to prioritize, okay, what are your key target, your key audiences that will reap the best results. And so if it's couples, if it's gay and lesbian, if it's the sports market, if it's cultural buff, if it's the double income, no kids, whatever the target market or the folks you want to target at, then you will create content accordingly. So some of them may be more on Snapchat and text messaging apps, while others that you really would put your efforts on will, short films and such initiatives will cater to the families or the crowd you want to seek. But I think there's not really a choice. Unfortunately, a lot of us will do the sort of, okay, well, we'll just go to a more generic approach, but you'll get the kind of results that go with that. So it's a tough choice to make, to sort of say, okay, I'm going to, make the choice to go with this in this market. But once you would do that and you prioritize, most of the times you will see the effectiveness of your campaigns will rise. So that's the hardest thing, is to make those choices and to prioritize. After that, the results usually will pay accordingly.
No, that's really interesting. And obviously, I mean, going back to John, Marriott obviously has been a brand around for a very long time. How do you feel that you have really kept your original brand story? Do you think that it has developed, or do you think that it's been authentic from the start? What would you say about that?
Well, of course, I'd say I think it's been authentic. I mean, we've been around for more than 85 years. It's an iconic brand that delivers a tremendous, level of customer service. So, and we're a brand that's known for listening to our consumers, and we have a great story to tell. And we do tell that story. For example, there's a website that we have called Heart of the House, in which we enable both our own associates, or we call those are our employees, as well as guests to submit stories about their travels, about their experiences with us. So, I think when it goes back to it for us, it's very easy for us, I love this word authenticity, to be authentic. We have lots of stories to tell, but I think it's also a question of, this idea of getting back to the first date thing, we can't just talk about ourselves. So I think what's really great is, when you look at something like our Marriott Traveler site, again, that digital publication, not only are we having professional byline journalists tell stories and YouTubers tell stories because they're great storytellers, we're inviting our Marriott Rewards members to tell stories about their travels and what makes it, unique and interesting to others. Our own associates are telling those stories as well, too. So I think it's basically built into our culture of service and that authenticity, and it's great to sort of bring that to life in so many different ways. And I think it's also, a testament to, a brand that enables its guests to tell a story about their own brand. Sort of we talked, Frederick, you mentioned the takeover of like a Twitter page and things like that, things that we've done too. So, yeah, I definitely think that we have a great advantage given, we've been around for so long and we know what our values are and we stand for them.
Yeah. Could you also just talk a minute or so a little bit more on your 3C strategy? One of our listeners just wants to learn a little bit more about that.
Sure, and then they all, think of it like a domino effect. Essentially, the way, as I mentioned, the consumer, particularly, the consumer that we're very interested in, the millennial, but also, we talked, or was brought up, different niche markets as an example as well, too, is that in order to engage with them and to provide that value, we need to create content, as I said, that entertains them, such as the two bellmen, or informs them, such as we know, for example, people when they're searching for or searching about travel, going on vacation or something like that, they start with a destination. They don't start with a hotel. So it's really about creating, we say, compelling content, content that you would want to consume as a consumer. And then as we provide that content over and over, again, more and more content, different channels, text, video, photographs, everything in terms of what we do, even in-room content such as magazines, you begin to generate a tremendous amount of awareness. And our goal is to use our content to both entertain, which is an awareness play, a reach play, so to speak, as well as inform. So you begin to create that content. People begin to, people who may not have been exposed to your brand are exposed to your brand. So you begin to create that community of people who are passionate about travel. We're in the travel business. That's what we want. So as we create that community that is passionate about travel and is consuming our content, we become top of mind. And maybe they haven't considered Marriott, or they haven't been to a Marriott branded hotel in years. Well, we've added value to their lives. So now we know the natural progression, and we believe the natural progression is commerce, the third C, that they will book hotel stays with us. And, sort of turning the model on its head, instead of coming with that strong sales pitch from the onset, which could be seen as interruptive, particularly among millennials, what we're doing is going through this 3C strategy of creating content, building communities that will drive commerce.
That's great. No, that's really interesting. And yeah, content creation, that's hugely, hugely important. Obviously, the more the better. And I just wanted to ask you, for brands who don't have, who might not have a larger budget as Marriott, what would you say are the top 3 most effective ways of creating content?
Well, I think it goes back to, again, what we've been talking about is it's about adding value. It's about being authentic, and it's not about talking about yourself. You can talk about yourself at one point, but you got to bring people along first. It's more nuanced than that. So, and I also agree with what Brett was saying, is you got to know who you are, and you got to know who you got to know your objectives. Who is your audience? How do they consume content? Things of that nature. So we know. We have a lot of research, a lot of information in terms of how people want to create content, and we're excited by new channels, and we're willing to try new channels. We were the first travel brand to go on to Snapchat, but not from the perspective of an advertising play, but by providing content, and that was pretty exciting for us. So, I think it's really just knowing, it's pure marketing. It's knowing what your objectives are, but also understanding what your audience wants and how they want to consume that content.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. And just, Brett, going back to you, Brett, in terms of cross-platform marketing, how can you really achieve consistency across all touch points? What is your strategy at Travelocity for that?
I think it's important to have that set up internally. So you got to make sure you have the checks and balances in your organization. And it kind of goes back to, what John was just saying too. If you know yourself and you have a clear mission, you have a clear strategy, and you have clear objectives to meet those things, then all your employees, everybody from the CEO down to an analyst, is going to understand who you are, what you're trying to do, and you're going to fill in the gaps of how you get there. But whether it is you're telling your story in a press release, whether it's a new video piece of content, whether it's a TV commercial, you have to make sure you have those checks and balances set up. But more than just that, you have to make sure that your employees have bought in, because being a strong brand and telling a strong story, in my opinion, starts from the inside out. If you and your employees do not believe in the story and the brand of who you're saying, you can't expect consumers to believe you then. So got to make sure that's set up. The positive news, though, about all of this is you don't have to have a huge content budget to be able to have a strong brand and tell your story. Obviously, content and social media provide a great avenue to do that, but I think if you can be consistent, so anytime you communicate with your consumers, whether it be out in the world, online, offline, however you do it, if you are giving that same story, that same feeling of who you are, that is powerful. And given the millennials these days, which are obviously a huge population and a huge target for most businesses, that is really powerful for them, because that's going to make it that much more authentic of who you are.
Absolutely. And also, just another quick one, when embarking on a brand story campaign, what kind of time scales should our listeners be really thinking about in terms of building a brand story?
Definitely. Well, I think one of the big pitfalls I think a lot of companies and business fall into is it's that immediate ROI. And that's actually, it was interesting from the poll earlier. I know Frederick had talked about this too. But, time was obviously up there and resources, but ROI wasn't as high. But I do know, as we all do, that we all have bosses and leaders and C-level executives that you have to go report to. And anytime you have a story or content or something that's a bit of a softer metric, it's tough to start showing what the success is. And so I would really, really encourage people, one, to set your objectives clearly and do that right away, and set those expectations with your leaders. So whether you're trying to drive new followers, whether you're trying to drive engagement, views, actual transactions, whatever the case may be, set those objectives, and also understand that when you're telling a story and you're building a brand and a relationship, it takes time. So as it was mentioned before, you won't be on your second date. Well, keep in mind that I am married, and there's been a ton of more dates after that as well. So to continue that analysis there, it's all about how do you continue that relationship, and it's constant work and it's constant investment. And you have to understand that it's not going to turn around in a day, and it's not going to happen right away. So the key is to really focus and explain how over time you can start showing metrics, you can start showing how you're going to meet those objectives, but to really try to set the expectations that it's not going to be a week or a month. The success is going to be definitely a longer time horizon.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I think you're so right. I think it really is about clarifying with senior leaders what your strategy is in a way that is very transparent, easy to understand, and it's the classic. You've got to get them to buy into it, and you've got to tell them, this is not, to your point, overnight. It's not like, it's not annual, or it's not, quarterly earnings or anything like that. So it's really having a very clear and definite strategy and having a point of view, and you've got to get them to buy into it.
That's really interesting. I'm going to come back to that. I'm just going to take one more question from our audience, which is, is it advisable to offer special rewards to incentivize social posts? Basically, Maria Baquero, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, she'd like to know if travelers are more prone to engage in social media if they're offered a perk. Frederick, what would you say on this?
I would tend to disagree. I think nowadays people, if you have a contest running and you have perks going, it's not a bad thing per se, because if it's part of an ongoing strategy with the loyalty program. But I think people usually will follow brand, and especially on Facebook and Twitter, for example, where I think 85% of followers on a Facebook page are either ongoing clients or past clients, past customers. So there are already people who are familiar with the brand, they love the brand, they follow it. You ask them questions, you seek their feedback. People will will chime in. That's what, that's the essence of social. And that's why if you create hashtags, you let people, ask people to contribute and send their best pictures, just the reward of having the picture. You look at how Australia does it, for example, where every Friday they have Friday fan photos and they showcase the best photos taken by fans throughout the week. Just the reward in itself of having your photo shown to a page that's got more than 6 million fans. I mean, that's so. I would be a bit stay shy around that, because then if you're asking people, you're giving them points or bonuses to share, then you're sort of putting your hand in a process that it's hard to get out. But I'd be curious to hear what John and Brett might say about that.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. My thought was that if you have to offer an incentive, then maybe you're not so confident about the content and the storytelling that you're creating. So, again, I think it gets back to, 5 million views of the two Bellmen. We didn't offer an incentive. We offered entertainment, and people really, really liked it. And, it's a 17-minute film, and the number of people or percentage of people that clicked on YouTube to watch that video and watched it from beginning to end is double what is the normal take rate in terms of that. If you can have those eyeballs for 17 minutes, man, that's just amazing from a brand perspective. And I think it's really believing in the content you're creating, because that's ultimately what it is. It's got to be compelling. If you need an incentive, if you need to incentivize someone to watch a short film or something like that, maybe you got to question who's producing that film.
Absolutely. No, that's very interesting indeed. We're going to have to wrap up fairly soonish. So what I'd like to do, if possible, if all three of you guys, I know we've covered quite a lot today and many things. I'm going to ask you two last questions each. First question is, can you wrap up with the three most important things we've discussed today, what everyone should be doing in their brand storytelling strategy? First to you, Frederick.
Well, I would make sure, to understand where storytelling and content marketing fits within your marketing strategy and business goals in general. Once you have that clear, then justifying results to C-level or understanding what the KPIs are will flow. It'll be an easy process. The second aspect I would say is to really embrace content that's already out there. It's not just about creating content. We've been talking a lot throughout this webinar about creating content, but there's a lot of curating that also takes place. So if you make sure your travelers, your clients are sharing that hashtag that you might have created and that's going on, then you can just curate throughout the photos and tweets and posts that are out there, and that makes your life easier. And the third one, I think, is just I'll focus once again on emotions, making sure you play either with humor, outrage. Well, you got to be careful not to be too controversial, but humor, and I think is a big one, but also anger, the various emotions that we've discussed that you want to make sure people stay clear, and just as we said, with a fire camp or with a first date. So that would be my three things.
That's great. Thank you. And John, what would you say the top three takeaways to take away from this webinar about what everyone must be implementing into their brand storytelling strategy?
Well, three things that just came to mind. I mean, and I think I've mentioned some of them before, but it is really about knowing your audience, knowing what kind of content that they want to consume, how they want to consume it. So I think that obviously is incredibly important, and I think that's just obviously a foundation of marketing. I think the other thing that is important is to work with people who tell stories for a living. Brands are publishers, that we're hearing that all the time, but there are people who are out there who are professional storytellers. That's why we're working with Jack's Gap, for example, on YouTube. I mean, they tell great stories. So let the storytellers tell their stories, enable your channel to be where they can tell those stories and provide that value to your audience. And then I think the last one really gets back, I hate to keep saying that date thing, but, don't be afraid to not have your brand and the brand messages front and center. I mean, it can be an enabler, in other words. So it's not about advertising. It's about providing that entertainment, providing that information that is useful and that evokes an emotion.
Thank you. That's great. And Brett, what are your 3 key summarizing facts?
Sure. I think going back to something I said before, be authentic. I know all 3 of us had mentioned this as well, but stick with who you are. The moment you try to be somebody else, consumers are going to realize that, and they're not going to believe you, and a lot of money and time are going to go into investing in something that may end up falling flat. So whatever your story is, whoever you are, that's what made you successful so far. So stick with that piece of it. Consistency is extremely important as well. So ensuring that whatever types of content you're putting forward, you're telling that same message. It all needs to come back to that same story, that same idea that you're coming across, and that's a great takeaway for a lot of businesses that don't have big budgets to go spend and create a lot more content or just create partnerships, because you can get a lot more bang for your buck when you're nailing home the same point across every touch point that you have. And then the last piece of it, as we talked a little before there, was making sure that you understand what does success look like, and make sure everyone in your organization knows what that is as well, because there are some pitfalls in the world of storytelling and brand and content that you're going to be asked to show results pretty quickly, and you want to make sure that you have a good handle on what you are going to view as success and set those expectations so that you're not pushed into a corner.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I just want to ask one final question, so then we're going to wrap up this webinar here. Now, obviously, you guys are very passionate about this, so I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be. But for brands that aren't really doing much on storytelling at the moment, how much value does this really add? Are we talking revolutionary, or is it just value added? And that can go to Frederick.
Yeah, that's actually a tough question because, I mean, it always depends on what the resources are in place and budget-wise, because I think we've said it many times in this webinar, but it's a long-term process when you're going into storytelling. So if a brand is seeking short-term results, they're not going to see the value. But to the same extent that Red Bull or Coca-Cola's of this world are investing massively into content, because that's where their brand is going, and they want to tell that story, and they want people to associate as soon as you see a Red Bull logo that it's extreme, it's adventure, it's the same with GoPro. So I think in travel, when you do that, whether you're a hotelier, you're a destination, you're a restaurant, or an event, when you're going down that path, it's because you're doing it for a medium to long-term standpoint. So it will add value, but if you're seeking short-term results, then it's not going to work.
Great. Okay, and Brett, would you agree with that?
Yeah, very much so. It's you have to go into it understanding that you're investing this over time. I would just say again though that keep in mind that telling a story, the brands matter no matter how big, small, even if you're looking for a short-term transaction or a long-term gain. So just keep in mind that some things that to really tell your brand story, you don't always have to spend a ton of money on. It's really making sure, spend the time and investment of understanding who you are, and then figure out what you are able to actually do to bring that to life.
That's great. Thank you so much. We've definitely taken some incredibly interesting insights from this webinar today, so thank you. And we're just about to finish up on the hour. So just a huge thank you to all of our speakers, well, Frederick, John, and Brett. As mentioned, we'll be sending everyone, all of our listeners, the recording, so you can go back over the insights shared today and make sure that you're implementing all of these, all this information into your strategies to get the best you can out of your initiatives. And that's it. And just to let you know that, again, this webinar is in association with the Senior Level Travel Industry event. So if you're interested in learning more insight like this, then do get in touch with me at emily@eyefortravel.com, and I hope to see you there in June. Thanks again, guys. Speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.